He is talking about suing. He is talking about suing. That was that cop.
Do you want to help read?
What would you want me to read if I were to read?
The war and the poor, failure to take responsibility of providing raises and failure to bring good jobs.
Administration. Sure.
Okay, so this would be and then you guys have and then I'll take over this.
Yes.
Okay.
I think that works.
And Nora didn't come. Wow. I thought Nora was going to come.
No, I don't think so. I don't know.
I just got married.
You can have her read. How many paragraphs do you have me reading?
4.
Each one of us.
Oh,
Something can be said in 3 words.
what was the date?
Oh, they're taking the picture. That's wrong.
Were you there when, what did Joel say? What's his fantasy? Long beard. Something all red.
Barbara, get in here. Oh, wait. Barbara. Barbara, come here. Do you want to help read the statement? You don't want to.
You know what I mean?
We ready?
They're funny kids like that.
Whatever you are.
Good afternoon. Can everybody hear me? Today, June 2, 2015, is the 1-year anniversary of the sit-in at the Albuquerque Mayor's office. The sit-in was organized by local residents last year to send a message to city officials to stop the nearly weekly killings by the Albuquerque Police Department. Dozens of people from all walks of life came together to use nonviolent direct action to wake up city leaders that the status quo has got to go. We came armed with handwritten letters for Mayor Richard J. Barry. 13 of us, now called the Albuquerque 13, decided to put ourselves in harm's way and to not disperse, to allow ourselves to be arrested and held overnight at the Metropolitan Detention Center. Some of us were thrown into dangerously hot vans, putting our health at risk. This is a brutal technique commonly used by APD to punish suspects. It is an example of unconstitutional policing, for it is cruel and unusual punishment and tantamount to torture. 1 year later, members of the Albuquerque 13 wanted to pause and take stock. Where are we today? Has the culture of excessive force and militarization been turned around at APD? Has there been accountability for crimes committed by APD officers? Have the DOJ findings and consent decree made our community safer from APD? This is our assessment. The culture of violence at APD has not ended, and there is a lack of leadership at APD and ultimately in the mayor's office sufficient to end the pattern and practice of unconstitutional policing and use of excessive force cited by the U.S. Department of Justice. Under this mayor's watch,
Lawlessness. The district attorney, Carrie Brandenburg, has reported that she fears for her safety after receiving threats by APD officers after charging 2 officers with murder for the fatal shooting of James Boyd. Abuse of power. New Mexico Attorney General Hector Balderas found that APD appeared to investigate the DA for politically motivated reasons in response to Brandenburg's charging the 2 officers for Boyd's death. Bankrupting city coffers. Another settlement against APD for a fatal shooting just resulted in a $6 million judgment paid for by the city taxpayers. Corruption. State Auditor Tim Keller found that former Chief Ray Schultz rigged a $2 million contract with Taser months before retiring from the department in 2013.
Barbara. So you do these two.
Incompetence even to their own. APD officer Jacob Grant is threatening to sue APD for being shot and critically wounded by a fellow officer in a $60 undercover drug bust. Deeply disturbing abuse of a corpse. Just released video from a 2014 incident, APD denied having the video, shows APD officers abusing the body of an already dead suspect. SWAT fired beanbag rounds repeatedly at an unresponsive suspect's face, flicking the suspect's eyeball and stomping on his groin. The man killed was suspected of rummaging through cars in a tow yard.
Excessive force. Just last week, 10 APD officers were put on paid administrative leave after chasing a suspected car thief and triggering a shootout in a working-class neighborhood. One neighbor feared her children who were out playing might be caught in the crossfire. Lack of accountability. There has been a complete lack of accountability for fatal shootings by APD, including Mary Hawks. Lack of accountability for the death of Mary Hahn and for APD's role in compromising the crime scene. Lack of accountability for use of excessive force. Lack of accountability for not turning lapel cameras on. Lack of accountability for withholding video footage. With no accountability, change is impossible.
The Perry administration's war on the poor. APD and city officials are responsible for excessive harassment and criminalization of homeless members of the Albuquerque community. Instead of proving real solutions, this administration tears down a pedestrian zone and launches a punitive plan against the poor for panhandling. Failure to take responsibility. The Perry administration has failed to take responsibility or even acknowledge that there is a problem, a crisis with police violence as identified by the DOJ in its findings letter from April 2014.
Providing raises and promotions to city employees who have failed to do their jobs, Richard J. Berry is promoted and given raises to Police Chief Gordon Eden, CAO Rob Perry, and Chief of Staff Gilbert Montano, in spite of their incompetence and inability to control APD. These raises are paid by our tax dollars. The Perry administration has failed to address the fragility of nearly 60,000 families at risk of losing their homes, and has failed to address our city's population loss due to lack of jobs. This is failure to bring good jobs to Albuquerque and to raise wages.
For all these reasons and many more unstated, we declare that the current state of affairs in the city of Albuquerque is evidence of a complete lack of leadership on the part of the current Albuquerque mayor and his administration. We members of the Albuquerque 13 and supporters therefore call on Richard J. Berry to resign the office of mayor immediately. As he is not suitable to the task at hand, inadequate, not up to the job of leading APD to change its culture of violence and militarization. We also call on CAO Rob Perry to resign.
Resign, Perry, Perry! Resign, Perry, Perry!
As he plays a major role in the failed policies and actions of this administration, we call for current City Council President Ray Garduno to serve as acting mayor until an election can be held for a new mayor. Signed by the members of the Albuquerque 13, who come from a broad and diverse segments of the Albuquerque community. Occupations represented by the Albuquerque 13 include caretaker, house cleaner, grandmother, graduate student, lawyer, union organizer, nurse, student, professor, hotel maintenance worker, artist, landlord, and community organizer. Signed, Nora Anaya, Ilse Biel, Jim Bowes, Bill Bradley, Kathy Brown, David Correia, Jon Dunn, Joel Gallegos, Barbara Grothus, Talia Madrid, Susan Schuurman. Next, we will hear from Nora Anaya, one of the Albuquerque 13 who suffered physical violence and emotional trauma that continues to this day from injuries she sustained at the hands of APD when she was taken into custody for the nonviolent sit-in. Nora.
You know, we did nothing wrong. We went up to the mayor to speak to Mayor Barry, to ask him to listen to us. And that's because our brothers and sisters were getting shot down in the street. Where's the media? 1, 2, 3. Thank you for coming. We appreciate your attention. And most and foremost, I need to apologize. What I need to apologize about is that we didn't break the door down at the mayor's office. We costed the taxpayers $10,000 for putting a new door that was never broken. I apologize for not going all the way to my hearing because they were going to throw another charge on me. They wanted to add one more charge. And the charge was child endangerment of my grandson. My grandson was never there. My grandson died in April of 2014. My God, what a pathetic feeling of animosity by the city of Albuquerque, Mayor Barry, and Perry Barry also. I never tased anyone. I never mauled anyone. And I sure as hell never killed anyone.
No justice! No peace! Resign, Mayor Perry! Barry, resign! Resign!
Next, we will hear from David Correia, one of the Albuquerque 13, who will share some of the findings from the People's Tribunal report.
So I think one of the legacies of last year's sit-in was a realization that there was really nobody that was going to create the kind of change in the city that everyone deserves. Not the DOJ, certainly not the City Council, definitely not Mayor Barry. And so in September of last year, a group of activists, many of whom are standing behind me now, decided to launch our own investigation of the Albuquerque Police Department. One of the things that every investigation of APD has always ignored is the actual people who are victims of police violence. The DOJ interviewed police officers, had access to police records, held community meetings, but they didn't go into the communities most victimized by police violence in Albuquerque. And so over the course of about 6 months, more than a dozen activists engaged in a systematic investigation of the Albuquerque Police Department. And what we found was that there's perhaps too much attention focused on the really shocking, unjustified use of lethal force, and not enough focus on the everyday use of unjustified force by Albuquerque police officers. Over the course of almost 6 months, we interviewed people on the streets in the International District, downtown, in the UNM area. We talked to almost 100 people, 41 of whom were willing to sit down with extensive interviews. We recorded those interviews. In March of this year, we worked through those interviews, And I want to just briefly tell you what we found. First, most of the people we talked to were homeless. Many were poor. Many were Native American, homeless women. We did not meet a single person who hadn't been physically attacked by an Albuquerque police officer. And in almost every case, they had not committed a crime before those encounters. We talked to a homeless Hispanic man in his 50s who described an incident in which the police snatched his ID from him. He was frightened. He turned to run. They chased him down. Quote, "They took my jacket and put it over my head, kicked me in the head, split my head open. I had probably 38 staples in my head. They shattered every rib on my left side." We talked to 2 homeless Native men who described being beaten in an alley by an Albuquerque police officer. We asked why they did it. They said, quote, "Because we're homeless and Native. That's why they do it." They described frequently receiving citations for loitering. Quote, "Cops come up and give us a ticket for loitering. We go to court but can't pay, and we end up getting a warrant, and we go to jail. We're out in the morning, and it happens all over again." This was constant. Every single Native person we talked to described APD's use of racial slurs, constantly being told by Albuquerque police officers to go back to the reservation. One said, quote, "I was walking down the street and a cop was following me. I went down an alley, he followed me there. Why don't you go back to the res? You're not welcome in Albuquerque," he told me, unquote. A young Native woman was reluctant to talk to me when I talked to her this spring. And she said, finally, "Look," quote, "this cop just drove up on me, got out, slammed my head into the pavement, then he got in his car and drove away." I talked to her friend who said, "Look, this happens all the time. We'll be waiting at a bus stop and cops will pull up and tell us to keep moving or they'll arrest us for loitering." We talked to a homeless man who had a cop walk up to him and said, "Put out that cigarette." When he put the cigarette out, the cop arrested him for littering. We talked to women who experienced sexual assault and rape, right? Rape by an Albuquerque police officer that was confirmed by another police officer. We found ultimately that APD does engage in racially motivated policing in the city of Albuquerque. This was a finding that the Department of Justice refused to make. We found that the Albuquerque Police Department routinely uses unjustified force on an everyday basis, particularly to police the poor, to police Native Americans, and to use violence against homeless women in particular. These are findings that the police department ignores, refuses to recognize, and also underreports. The consent decree between the Department of Justice and the City of Albuquerque entirely hinges on whether or not the police department will report the force that they use. If the police department does not report that force to the federal monitor, then there's nothing that the federal monitor can do to force compliance. And what we demonstrated in our report was that routinely Albuquerque police officers underreport or refuse to report their use of force. This is a routine practice among Albuquerque police officers, particularly in the International District. This has gotten worse as attention has been placed on it. So we stand here today not expecting Mayor Berry to resign because he's never done anything to the benefit of this city. It's all self-interested on his part, but we need to bring attention to this issue. The problem is the tragedy of the loss of lives by unjustified use of force. But let's just remember that it's an every single day fact of life for homeless people, particularly homeless Native men and women in this city. Thank you.
Next up, Dinah Vargas will talk about Tent City.
As a result of the Albuquerque Justice Tribunal report, we began working with the members of the Tent City on First and Iron, which was dubbed Tent City 1. We are now currently at Tent City 9, and we are at this moment, while we speak, being evicted by the Albuquerque Police Department and other officials, evicting members that are of our community that are homeless, suffering from poverty, many of them young veterans, male, female, all walks of life, Native Americans, as well as specifically women. There is a lack of resources within the city for women in particular. And so once again, we have called upon the office of the mayor. We have called upon him with systemic, viable literature that included a plan that would essentially pay the city. We have asked that they look into the shelters and other resources available for the homeless community. If indeed, at the end of the day, the fact and the goal was to change and to stop homelessness, we can only conclude that we do not share the same goal, because if we wanted to end poverty, if we wanted to end homelessness, we would have done it, because it's completely possible, because we are doing it right now as community members. We have failed leadership. New Mexico is dead last by design, and we are a collective people not willing to stop until all our people are essentially free and with liberty. Thank you.
Next, a member of our community who wants to share a story of how APD treated her is Odette.
Hello, I'm a VA veteran. I'm disabled and have a mental defect. In 2000, the cops shot me in the head with a beanbag on my mother's grave at Sunset Memorial. It was shown throughout the different states, and my family had to find out it was me. They thought I was dead, and they would not allow my father to come see me in the hospital. They had me chained to the bed. And after all that happened, there was no charge. I was let go, but I had like 50 stitches in my head where they almost put out my eye with a beanbag. Thank you.
No justice! No peace!
Next, Frances would like to share her story.
I had an incident where there was just a problem with my son. He has mental conditions, and I did ask for a CIT cop, and they denied it. And at that time, they just took force and beat me and my child up, and I'm disabled as well. But they just decided to just take it into their own hands, and they mistreated us, and my son's still incarcerated. But yet I have no charges, and he does.
Okay, we're going to open it up to questions. Would anybody like to answer that? The question is, has anything improved at all in the last year?
I think we have seen some improvement, but I still think we have a very long way to go. We do have 2 cops that are hopefully going to be facing some murder charges after this preliminary hearing, and the shootings have decreased. However, we have had some incidents in the past couple of weeks, but the incidents, they seem to be decreasing in frequency, and I think it's a direct result of a group of activists who refuse to be silent.
So there was a report on National Public Radio, I think maybe last week, that said there was an interview with Department of Justice, people who've been doing consent decrees around the country, and they said the biggest possible thing you can hope for to get change is an administration who admits the problem and moves forward to solve it. This administration continues to deny that there is a problem, and that is the largest block to Albuquerque moving forward of any.
In late 2012, Mickey Owings was in a Walmart parking lot in a stolen car. He drove the car back and forth into civilian vehicles and into police vehicles that were pulled in to block him. An Albuquerque police officer ran up at Mickey Owings from the side and shot him through the passenger side window. At the time, Albuquerque Police Department policy allowed officers to shoot into the cabins of motor vehicles. The DOJ report talked extensively about that shooting, about that the policy was wrong, that it made conditions more unsafe than safe, that shooting a driver of a moving vehicle made the vehicle into a weapon that endangered lives, that nobody was being endangered by Mickey Owings at the time he was shot, till he drove away and died while driving away. What's today? Tuesday? 8 days ago, an Albuquerque police officer shot into the cabin of an SUV. One of the people in the SUV was a 5-year-old child. When asked about it, Chief Eden said, "We're in the process of changing the policy allowing police officers to shoot into the cabins of motor vehicles." The DOJ report criticizing that policy and pointing out how wrong it was came out in April of last year. It would have cost the city absolutely no money at all to change that policy. Yet the policy has not changed. How can we expect the millions of dollars that the city is laying out, supposedly to create reform, to actually do any good or to demonstrate any commitment on the part of the city when they won't even do the simple things that don't cost any money at all? No, there's no improvement.
And part of that lack of improvement includes Officer Cedric Greer, who beat a homeless man repeatedly, asking him who is the man over and over again, until the homeless man replied, "You are the man," to Officer of APD Cedric Greer. That happened of March of 2015. It was not released to the public until April of 2015, and that is a year after the Department of Justice report, and that is after $500,000 going to Stryker and Greenwood. That is after millions of dollars is being approved for the DOJ monitor, and all our city officials can ask is, well, who's going to monitor the monitor? And if we say, well, who's going to monitor the monitor's monitor, I guess we could be here all day wasting more of our money instead of acknowledging once again that we have a problem and that we currently still have, recently within the past 3 months, officers beating homeless people on record, and the only transparency that we get is a YouTube video on YouTube, on the internet, which makes it less accessible to people, especially those who can't afford such things like the internet. And they justify it by saying that they're trying to reach a larger audience. Well, that's fine, but the problem is that it was only on YouTube. So the city continues to run loops around even transparency for even those who are active and activated in looking at our city's problems and trying to fix them or address them systemically. They hinder that progress time and time again. Just today, I was getting some IPRA requests that I requested, and they wanted over $130, which makes it completely it's unaffordable for most people, and it was unaffordable for me to obtain records requests that could have been placed on a disc, and I would have gladly paid the $5 or $6 or whatever it was instead of well over $100. So what has changed is that there are still people here. That hasn't changed, but that we keep adding people to our collective group of people to make our communities better. We still live under failed leadership in Albuquerque.
Next question. Any other questions? I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to thank the members of the media that came. We're talking Mike Swick from Available Media, Charles Arison. We want to thank the Albuquerque Journal, KRQE 13. Thanks. And thanks for everybody that helped make today possible, everybody who came and showed up. We are not going away. Thank you.